Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tran Mendez, and I'm an academic trainer with the Center for Teaching and Learning. And today we have Taylor Duncan and Sherry Moore from the library, and they are going to be going over engaging with information literacy. Just a couple of housekeeping items. I am currently recording today's session, and I will have it posted in the faculty resource area by the end of today, along with the PowerPoint presentation. If you have any questions along the way, please use the chat box or the Q&A box, and there will be a few polls, so keep your eye out for that during today's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Taylor and Sherry.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Engaging with Information Literacy. This is the second in a series of presentations focusing on the Association for College and Research Libraries framework for information literacy for higher education. We hope that by the end of this presentation, you're going to have a thorough understanding on the frame, information creation as a process. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Taylor Duncan. I'm the instructional design librarian here at NCU, and I've been with the library since 2013.
And my name is Sherry Moore. I'm a reference and instruction librarian, and I've been with the NCU Library since June 2019.
So let's go ahead and get started. When we're talking about information literacy, we are associating that with the ACRL's framework for information literacy for higher education. In that, they have 6 interconnected core concepts with flexible options for implementation. Today, we're focused on information creation as a process. Faculty can integrate these concepts when designing curricula and assignments that foster enhanced engagement with the core ideas about information and scholarship within their disciplines. I do want to emphasize that ACRL does not list these frames in order of operation or order of importance. They're simply listing them in alphabetical order, and that's because all of the frames are interconnected. Research is a continuous and evolving process, and the frames can be applied throughout the entire information creation. So we'll see as we go along in this series how a lot of the frames do overlap with one another. So moving on to a broad definition of this particular frame. In essence, information creation as a process refers to the process of producing information in order to convey meaning. The purpose of the information, the format in which it is delivered, the end product, and any ongoing revisions are all part of this frame, and they're all considered intentional acts of creation. Here on the slide, we do have the official definition that's been provided by ACRL. Information in any format is produced to convey a message and is shared via a selected delivery method. The iterative processes of researching, creating, revising, and disseminating information vary, and the resulting product reflects these differences. That is ACRL's exact wording, but as we progress in this presentation, we are going to break down the frame just a bit more. So on this next slide, we're going to discuss how the frame has evolved over time from when ACRL initially published the framework for information literacy for higher education. In its first draft of the framework, the frame we are discussing today was titled Format as a Process, and it was defined as such. Format is the way tangible knowledge is disseminated. The essential characteristic of format is the underlying process of information creation, production, and dissemination, rather than how the content is delivered or experienced. I've put our present definition of the frame directly below that for comparison's sake. So you can see how the frame morphed from seeing format as the essential characteristic underlying the process of information creation to stating the necessity to look beyond format when selecting resources. Hence why the frame is no longer hyper-focused on format, but looks more broadly at the process of creating information regardless of format. So this next slide goes into the knowledge practices that are associated with information creation as a process. And again, these do come straight from the ACRL information literacy framework. The framework doesn't provide specific learning outcomes, but instead they give these knowledge practices, and these are similar to skill sets that students should develop related to that particular frame. So learners who are developing their information literate abilities around information creation as a process should be able to articulate the capabilities and constraints of information developed through various creation processes, assess the fit between an information product's creation process and a particular information need, articulate the traditional and emerging processes of information creation and dissemination in a particular discipline, recognize that information may be perceived differently based on the format in which it is packaged, recognize the implications of information formats that contain static or dynamic information, monitor the value that is placed upon different types of information products in varying contexts, transfer knowledge of capabilities and constraints to new types of information products, and lastly, develop in their own creation processes an understanding that their choices impact the purposes for which the information product will be used and the message it conveys.
The ACRL has established a set of dispositions they believe learners should possess as they develop their information literacy skills. It is these dispositions that librarians keep in mind when inquiring about student research abilities or exploring the way the frames apply to student behavior in the context of research. Information literate individuals are inclined to seek out characteristics of information products that indicate the underlying creation process, value the process of matching an information need with an appropriate product, accept that the creation of information may begin initially through communicating in a range of formats or modes, accept the ambiguity surrounding the potential value of information creation expressed in emerging formats or modes, resist the tendency to equate format with the underlying creation process, and understand that different methods of information dissemination with different purposes are available for their use. Taylor and I are interested in learning more about your initial thoughts regarding this frame. Please take the next minute or so to respond to these poll questions.
And I am starting to see answers come through. So I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds to allow everybody to participate. We're at about the halfway mark here. So if you haven't logged in your answer, please do so. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now.
Okay, thank you for sharing your responses. Let's review them. Okay, so the first question was, how important is understanding information creation as a process for student success? 60% of our attendees voted that's important, and 40% voted that it's very important. Would anyone like to share their reasoning behind their response with us?
And if you would like to share verbally, raise your hand and I will give you the ability to speak, or you can share through the chat if you're not able to speak with us today.
And if you don't have any feedback right now, that's perfectly fine. We do have a poll at the end of the webinar. We just kind of wanted to gauge how you feel at this point in our presentation.
All right, I don't see any hands raised or anything in the chat.
So let's go to the next one. Okay. Were there other responses or was it just the one question, Tran?
So I have all four in there separately. So if you want me to run the next question, I can.
Oh, yes, please. My apologies. I thought that all four were sent out.
So here is the second polling question. All right, and I think the responses have slowed down, so I will go ahead and end this question here.
Okay, so our second question, do you think students have an understanding of the information creation process? The majority voted somewhat and 20% voted no. Would anyone like to share why they said no?
I would be curious to know why someone would select no, if
Yeah.
anyone wants to share. If not, perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then while we're waiting for responses, Sherry, do you want me to run the next question or is that for later?
All four, please.
All four,
Okay.
yes.
So
Thanks, Tran.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, and it looks like our responses have slowed, so I'm going to go ahead and end this question.
Okay, our third question, do you think they, as in students, would benefit from exercises or instructional material that identify the importance of the creation process? The majority, 75%, said yes. 25% indicated somewhat. Would anyone like to share their reasoning behind somewhat?
And while we're waiting for that, I will go ahead and run the last question.
Thanks, Tran. And I would say that perhaps your opinion might change by the end of the presentation in terms of if you were on the fence as to whether that could be beneficial for students.
And I'm just waiting for a few more responses to come in before I close out this one. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, and our final question, do you see a need for student competency in regards to this frame? The majority said yes. 25% said somewhat. Again, open to hearing your thoughts.
I don't see anything in the chat yet. And then remember, if you would like to speak, just raise your hand using the raise your hand tool at the bottom, and I will unmute you and give you speaking rights. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat or any raised hands at this time.
Okay, now that we've gathered your initial perspective, let's discuss some additional ones. I'm going to start with the librarian perspective. Lane Wilkinson, the Director of Instruction Services at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, wrote a critical opinion piece on this frame. He discussed the frame in its draft version versus the final version and stated that he thought the final was worse than the draft. He wrote, "It's like I keep reading it over and over again, and just about every sentence is saying the same thing in different language. When evaluating information, expert researchers consider how that information was produced. Really, at a conceptual level, what's in this frame other than that? Why make it more difficult? Also, why make it a threshold concept? Yes, experts consider process, but what do novices do? What does a student who hasn't understood this look like? Because all the students I work with all seem to get this. I think my students just haven't been exposed to the full range of types of processes like peer review and scholarly publishing, and so on. Most importantly, Wilkinson stressed, I don't introduce students to the concept of indicators of quality. I introduce students to indicators of quality that they aren't familiar with. There's a big difference. The threshold concept only says that process matters. It doesn't say anything about actually understanding process. On the other hand, librarian Amanda Skull was optimistic about the possibilities of this frame. She discussed the need to take advantage of the current information environment to which we have access and illustrated the intention to turn students into creators of information as opposed to just consumers. She stressed creating information literacy assignments and courses that push students to grapple with the following questions. What makes this information format unique from others in its creation and consumption? What are the benefits to choosing this format over another for creation, dissemination, and consumption? What are the challenges? How has the use of this format changed over time? She stated that, quote, while these approaches to information creation and format are undoubtedly useful and necessary, I believe that this frame provides librarians with more potential than is currently being recognized. The emphasis given by the framework to students as creators rather than just consumers, as was the focus of the standards, also means that we can encourage new ways for students to learn by doing. This leads me to the students' take on this frame. What are students experiencing and comprehending? Do their perspectives match those of the librarians? Librarian Rachel Scott conducted an exploratory study in which she ran pre- and post-tests to gather student perspectives on the ACRL framework. She was interested in learning more about student comprehension in regards to the language and concepts used within the frames. The pre-test questions were administered to undergraduate students and were recorded at the beginning of a semester-long research methods course. This table on the slide identifies student perspectives on our frame, information creation as a process. The majority of the responses listed vaguely identify steps within the research process. Some are more detailed than others. The response that is most notable to me states, there is an information creation process? According to Scott, 8 students were uncertain and didn't even respond to this question. The responses in this table identify a definite lack of clarity regarding information creation, as well as a lack of connection between the information creation process and specific information needs. There also is no discussion regarding differing formats, which I found very interesting. Scott continued her exploratory study by inviting the students to participate in her section of the research methods course. Participants watched a lecture given by a documentary filmmaker about information creation, as well as Scott's PowerPoint presentation on this frame. The presentation focused on various formats of information creation, including concept maps and visual depictions of discipline-specific research. The post-test revealed a stronger understanding of this concept as it applies to research. Scott concluded her study with the following thoughts, quote, the study taught me that starting off the semester by ascribing value to students' words and experiences helped to establish that I intended to learn alongside them. By establishing early on that I was excited about what they knew and hoped to learn, I believe that they were more willing to be open about their struggles with the unfamiliar discourse. Bearing witness to students' negotiation to liminal spaces of information literacy understanding was transformative indeed. I think these concluding thoughts are extremely powerful. As librarians, we often set out to demonstrate how to use databases or construct search phrases without truly identifying our willingness to learn alongside our students. This framework calls for exactly that concept, understanding the concept of creating information and learning how it synthesizes into its final form. This leads me to faculty's perspective on this frame. Librarian Lou Marie Guth and colleagues at Western Michigan University and Wayne State University were interested in learning more about faculty perspectives on information literacy in general, and specifically on the ACRL framework. Teaching faculty from Western Michigan University and Wayne State University were asked 3 questions. How important is information literacy for student success? How do you rank the individual frames in importance? And are there institutional or disciplinary differences? And how do you react to the language of the frames? And are there disciplinary differences? Before I reveal their responses, let's look at another survey. In a survey of faculty at the Moraine Valley Learning Academy, librarians Troy Swanson and Tish Hayes conducted a similar assessment of faculty perspectives on the ACRL framework. Swanson wrote, "The one frame that was the most problematic to faculty was information creation as a process. The initial discussion board posts around this frame revealed some confusion. They especially seemed confused at the idea of connecting evaluation of sources to the ways that the information was created. They didn't recognize the judgments often made when scholars consider investigative journalism, opinion pieces, peer-reviewed works, trade publications, and other types of sources. The process, philosophical understanding, and approach to the writing communicate meaning to the experienced scholar or professional." Going back to the Guth study, Guth and colleagues discovered similar findings. The teaching faculty surveyed echoed the sentiment that perhaps this frame was created solely from the librarian's perspective and not theirs. So given the confusion regarding this frame, what makes it important? Why do we need to teach it? Is this something that is only important to librarians? Do students really need to know about the information creation process?
So now that we've had an overview of the frame and we've talked about librarian, student, and faculty perspectives, let's break down the frame just a bit more. ACRL goes on to discuss how novice researchers versus expert researchers come to understand this particular concept. And they also break down the definition of the frame into its parts. The information creation process could result in a range of information formats and modes of delivery. The unique capabilities and constraints of each creation process, as well as the specific information need, determine how the product is used. Elements that affect or reflect on the creation, such as pre- or post-publication editing or reviewing process, may be indicators of quality. The dynamic nature of information creation and dissemination requires ongoing attention to understand evolving creation processes. In terms of experts versus novices, novice learners begin to recognize the significance of the creation process, leading them to increasingly sophisticated choices when matching information products with their information needs. In terms of experts, experts look beyond format when selecting resources to use. Experts recognize that information creations are valued differently in different contexts, such as academia or the workplace. So they're looking for indicators of quality, like post-publication editing or peer review process. Lastly, experts look to the underlying processes of creation as well as the final product to critically evaluate the usefulness of the information. Now that we've broken down the frame a bit more, let's discuss why this particular frame even matters. Why is it important? In today's information environment, there are so many different formats that students are going to encounter, both in academic and in personal pursuits. So everything from emails to discussion boards to Facebook videos. Formats are seemingly illimitable now. It's important for students to understand the process behind information creation. So one example would be a peer-reviewed article. It's critical for students to understand what goes into that publication and what implications that creation process has for their research. Another reason why this frame is so important is related to critical evaluation. Critical evaluation is a sustainable, lifelong skill which will continue to serve students beyond graduation. This concept is really relevant when students have endless information at their fingertips. Simplified search engines like Google or even web-scale discovery searches like the NCU Libraries Roadrunner search can yield millions of results, making it so easy to get the information. What students need help with is not necessarily getting the resources, but rather knowing how to critically evaluate the information sources that they find.
NCU has a unique educational environment. How do we make this frame work within our learning culture? In a strictly online setting, we can provide students with access to various information environments that move beyond format and closer towards the concept of identifying and evaluating format based on information needs. How can we move beyond format and closer to this threshold concept? Librarian Kevin Sieber breaks it down into 8 pieces. I'm going to discuss my top 3. You can view the full list, by connecting to Sieber's article within our LibGuide on information literacy. So my first one is to focus on the process, not the format, during instruction. Instead of placing an emphasis on scholarly articles, create a discussion focused on the research, experiments, and peer review, which create those scholarly articles. This will provide the students with more context as to why these types of articles are important to include within their assignments, and especially within their dissertations. Sieber contended that this understanding provides students with the foundation to identify scholarly work based on, quote, those things which give that source its benefits and limitations, end quote. The second one is to discuss processes objectively. The nature of publishing and online communication is changing. In addition, there is a vast diversity of information available to users now. Given this shifting environment, Sieber argued that it is important to focus on the various processes and argued against claiming a quote-unquote best source to use. It is important to equip students with the ability to use their own values when evaluating information. Quote, moreover, librarians need to take this approach if they want to form a definition of information literacy which is pluralistic and non-judgmental, end quote. And finally, my top 3, use process to discuss authority. This frame moves authority away from the author, the default connection and tie to authority, and focuses it on the process itself. Sieber provided the following example. Quote, not everything a scholar writes is peer-reviewed research, so a definition of scholarly has to go beyond the author's position to include an investigation of the process through which they are communicating, end quote. This gives educators the opportunity to guide students toward the various forms of information presented in a variety of contexts, as well as the applicability and reliability that are dependent on multiple factors. Once students grasp this concept, it will allow them to see the social and political aspects of information and question why some formats are privileged over others, and may also very well empower them to not only be consumers of information, but also its potential creators, if only they too are willing to engage in the process.
Okay, so let's move on to how you can incorporate the frame, information creation as a process, into your course assignments. As the instructional design librarian, I just want to note that I'm always available to assist faculty when working with the curriculum and determining ways to customize assignments to meet the framework. So we do have some potential example assignments. I'm going to present a few here, and Sherry has one as well. So number 1, for a given topic, you could have students identify various formats of sources that are applicable to that specific topic, and that would be including and in addition to peer-reviewed sources. Students would then discuss their thoughts on how useful those formats would be to, let's say, literature reviews. Another assignment, have students identify different types of evidence-based research that is either provided to them or that they discover on their own. In either case, students will discuss what type of evidence-based research that source falls under, be it double-blind, a systematic review, a case study, and so on, and again, report out their findings to colleagues. A third idea, students will each receive a source, perhaps a newspaper article, a book chapter, a journal article, a blog post. The student will try to convey the role of the source within the research process by closely defining its format.
Portfolios are also great exercises in active learning. They provide an iterative learning experience that allows students to go through the time-consuming process of creating something meaningful. Portfolios may involve audio or visual projects, website development, virtual reality, digital mapping, data visualization, 3D design, or scholarly work. NCU One offers an e-portfolio feature for students. The CTL outlines how to create an e-portfolio, save artifacts, and add content to collections. This is a great way to introduce students to the process of creating and synthesizing their own work.
On the next set of slides, we will present NCU library tools and strategies to just further inculcate the concept that information creation is a process. First up, we have the NCU Libraries Roadrunner search. For those of you who are not familiar with our Roadrunner search, it's that central search box that you see right when you hit the library's homepage. It's a web-scale discovery search designed to search across 95% of the library's databases all at one time. So we often recommend students start there for virtually any research topic. There are a number of filters that are available from the results screen once you've conducted a search in Roadrunner. And one of the options is to filter by source type. So students who are engaged in thinking about information creation as a process can look to the source type filter when they're determining which source or sources are the best fit for particular assignments, be it academic journals, books, reports, conference proceedings, magazines, and so on. In addition to the filter by source type, we also have the scholarly peer-reviewed journals filter that's available from the Roadrunner search. This filter it's seemingly straightforward. If students are seeking strictly scholarly or peer-reviewed content from the library, then they can select that limiter. However, it's important to keep in mind that not all scholarly journals go through the peer review process. Checking the scholarly peer-reviewed limiter in the library's Roadrunner search will result in scholarly journal articles, most of which are peer-reviewed. However, Roadrunner search does not make the distinction between scholarly and peer-reviewed journal articles in its results. So, for example, if you were to conduct a subject search on leadership and education and you selected the scholarly peer-reviewed limiter, you would still get results from a publication called Democracy in Education. It's an academic publication, so it's considered a scholarly publication. However, they do not go through a peer review process for their articles. So it's important to keep in mind that just because a journal is peer reviewed does not guarantee that all articles in it are included in the peer review process. Some article types in a peer review journal, such as news items, editorials, book and article reviews, may not be peer reviewed. Faculty and students will need to determine for themselves whether or not they are reading a book review or an editorial versus an actual peer-reviewed research study from a peer-reviewed journal. The library databases will typically not make this distinction for you. So this is another instance where the information creation process really comes into play.
Ulrich's Web is a great resource for determining whether a publication is peer-reviewed. Information literate students understand the need to identify this information when the database or resource is lacking the creation process pertinent to their information need. Going back to Taylor's example, if a student was unclear about the peer review status of the journal, for example, Democracy in Education, an information literate student would recognize the need to discover this information through the database Ulrich's Web, which they have access to through NCU. An information literate student will also possess the ability to determine whether the format of the article, editorial, opinion piece, etc., applies to the peer review status as well.
Okay, so we're going to pop outside of NCU Library for just a second to talk about a different tool that can assist in understanding information creation as a process, and I'm referring to Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a scholarly search engine that allows you to broadly search for scholarly literature, including articles, theses, books, abstracts, court opinions from academic publishers, professional societies, online repositories, universities, and other websites. A feature that's available for some results within Google Scholar is the versions feature, and that allows you to view other versions of a resource, including preprint, revised, and new edition copies. So when applicable, it's available as a hyperlink below the result title. And when thinking about the information creation process, this feature allows the student to view how a particular resource has evolved and to take a look at its iterations throughout the creation process. All right, back to the NCU Library. We did want to point out the Research Process Library Guide, which has been developed in-house by the NCU Librarians. The research process is intended to walk a student through every step of conducting research. So everything from initially determining a research topic all the way to scholarly publication. The guide section that would correlate with our presentation today is determining information needs. This section covers how to determine what you need in terms of source types and how to evaluate the information from those sources. We broadly define primary and secondary resources, academic, popular, and trade publications, scholarly and peer-reviewed journals, gray literature, clinical trials, evidence-based treatment, statistics, and data sets. So know that information is available from the research process for you to refer students to, or you can even incorporate it within any of your courses.
In addition to the library's resources, faculty can access Cora, which is a great collaborative space for adapting and experimenting with research assignments. Users have the ability to share the success or lessons learned so that others may benefit. Users can also browse assignments by frame, discipline, education level, or if it's geared towards an individual or a group. And likewise, the ACRL has provided a sandbox of information literacy resources that are browsable by frame, discipline, and institution type. If you're interested in learning more about the ACRL framework and information literacy, you can visit our library guide. It also includes a list of resources used throughout this presentation. If you are interested in learning more about the inclusion of these resources or concepts into your course, please feel free to schedule a session with Taylor by clicking on the Request an ID Consultation tab. So now that we've thoroughly broken down this frame and provided example assignments and the tools and resources you need to create meaningful assignments and activities that address this frame, let's gauge whether your opinion has changed. So we'll be launching our poll again, and then we'll open the forum up to questions, thoughts, comments.
And Sherry, do you want me to start with question number 1 again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Here comes number 1. I'm just going to leave the poll open for a few more seconds so that everybody can log their responses. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Okay, so I believe this has not changed from our initial poll. So many of you still believe that this frame is very important. That's great. We think it's very important as well. So we're glad your opinion hasn't changed on that.
All right, here comes the second question. All right, and it looks like responses have slowed down, so I will go ahead and end this poll and share the results.
Okay, 100% of you think that it's somewhat important, or they somewhat have an understanding. That definitely has changed.
And we're hoping that the example assignments that we provided may be of interest to you. Like I said, you can work with me to potentially have those integrated into the curriculum so that we can help students understand the information creation process.
Would anyone like to explain their change in opinion? Did we sway your opinion with our presentation?
Feel free to use the chat box or to raise your hand and I will give you speaking rights. And then while we are waiting, do you want me to go ahead and load the next one?
Yes, please.
All right, and it looks like responses have slowed, so I will go ahead and end this question and share the results.
Okay, this one has changed as well, 100%.
All right, and remember, if you would like to share, please use the chat box or use the raise your hand tool and I will let you speak. And while we're doing that, I will go ahead and pull up the last question.
Thank you, Tran.
You're welcome. All right, and it looks like responses have slowed, so I will go ahead and share this one as well.
Okay, this one has changed as well. Would anyone like to share any comments or questions, any thoughts about this frame or what you've noticed amongst your own students?
And just as a reminder, again, you can always collaborate with the library to be integrating this framework into course assignments or referring them to any of the tools within and without the library that we mentioned that, again, can help students understand this framework.
We are a shy bunch today. I don't see any hands raised and I don't see anything coming through in the chat box. But the good news is you can always reach out to Sherry and Taylor by email and you guys can have your questions or your thoughts. You can discuss that way as well. We all know how to find each other. All right, so I have something here that came through. So teaching students the frame would be as part of a class, or would there be another good way to train students? Maybe even videos?
That's a great question. So the course assignments were just examples of ways that we could, as I was saying, you could collaborate with the library in ways that we could integrate the frame into our curriculum. But my other recommendation would be utilizing any of the tools or resources that we refer to within the library.
And we could also work hand in hand to create something for your students that where you've noticed a lack or a need, so that we can create something specific that goes beyond just them watching a video and them actually conducting active learning. I agree, a multi-pronged approach might work best.
So it sounds like students can work with your team directly if they wanted to.
Absolutely.
Love that. Just more resources for our students. All right, I don't see anything else in the chat box. Let me check the Q&A box real quick. Okay, while we wait for any last minute questions, Taylor and Sherry, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you.
As always, I learned so much in these sessions, and I will post this in the faculty resource area. And then this way faculty can refer to the recording afterwards. And then maybe as they are working on new course content, it's something that they can refer to as well as they're developing new assignments. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, so I don't see any other questions. We had a couple of thank yous in the chat box. So I will give everybody a little bit of time back to your day. And I hope to see everybody at the next webinar. Again, Taylor and Sherry, thank you so much. And I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.